Before we get started on our first interview segment of the day, I do want to provide a trigger warning that we are talking about some sensitive topics here. If you have a history of sexual assault either in your life or in your family, and some of these topics may be triggering to you, I would encourage you to take a pause from watching our show today or skip through to about 15 or 20 minutes from now to our next segment, so as to not put you in a place of trauma, as we're talking about a very important but obviously very traumatizing topic for a lot of people. Joining us now for our weekly mental health segment is Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Carrie, thank you for being with us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you on to talk about, as I had said, a very sensitive topic. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and there's so much to unpack when it comes to sexual assault and the impact that it can have on someone and on their family, on their friends, on their entire life, from the incident to years and years, even decades beyond that for the rest of their life. So let's just begin with some statistics. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, reports that every 73 seconds an American is sexually assaulted, and every 9 minutes that victim is a child. Now, sexual violence can be committed by anyone and against anyone at any time. There's not really one specific demographic, but there are so many different ways that sexual assault or other sexual violence can affect somebody both immediately and in the long term. Let's just dive in immediately and talk about some of the different ways that can affect people all across the board, given that this can happen to people across all different demographics.
Absolutely. And I think one of the important messages of this year's Sexual Assault Awareness Month is making these connections, that the umbrella of sexual violence covers so many behaviors. Of course, we've talked about rape, child sexual abuse, but it can also be, non-consensual touching, non-consensual sending lewd pictures to someone or sending pictures that have been sent to you to someone else, any kind of workplace sexual harassment or flirting or touching that exceeds somebody's sexual comfort. And so the range of potential behaviors that can be alarming have grown. And of course, our awareness of how people are affected has also grown.
And that's an interesting point too that you make, that it's well expanded beyond what the stereotypical view of what sexual assault or sexual violence had been in the past, where it was a groping incident or it was rape or something along those lines, to even things that seem like they could be more minor but are very much not, like non-consensual touching or flirting, because those things have happened so casually in our society for so long that they've become, in some ways, innate parts of certain environments and for certain people. So as we're considering our own behaviors in the workplace and in other social settings, and really in any setting, what are some of those behaviors that tend to lead into more problematic behaviors that go into this sort of category of sexual violence?
Well, I think even like you started, with this, with your lead in this morning, right, is that you don't know anybody's history with sexual trauma, but just statistically, like you said, something like 1 in 9 children under 18, 1 in 4 or 5 adults, female or male accordingly, so that at any given moment, you've got probably greater than a 20% chance of encountering someone who's experienced some form of sexual abuse, sexual assault, or sexual trauma. So any of those unwanted advances are potentially re-traumatizing a person, and you may never know. Now, some people move on from sexual trauma quite literally like nothing's happened. Either they truly move on like nothing's happened, or they're experiencing some sort of repression or numbing as a result. People may experience body symptoms, trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating, jitteriness, jumpiness, flashbacks of uncomfortable times. They may also experience emotional symptoms, uncontrollable emotional reactions, sort of like you use the word trigger, sort of easily triggered emotional reactions, either anger, anxiety, or sadness. They may experience other symptoms of pain, stomach discomfort. They may experience behavioral symptoms such as attempts to numb, like self harm, or violence to themselves, substance use or abuse, and also impact them in their relationships, either promiscuity and sexual acting out, or avoidance of sexual activity altogether. So it can really span different people, different ranges, different combinations of symptoms.
Uh, we're joined by Carrie Krawiec on today's edition of the Megacast. She is the therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. You can get in contact with Carrie and the team at the Birmingham Maple Clinic by visiting birminghammaple.com or calling their phone number at 248-646-6659 for a consultation and to schedule appointments. Carrie, there's so much to unpack when it comes to victims, when it comes to survivors of sexual assault and other sexual violence, because as you said, for different people, they may move on from those incidents very, very quickly. They may not have any symptoms at all. For others, those symptoms may remain latent. And for some, those symptoms may be something that they are hiding or keeping in quiet. And we know that going forward with admitting that, yeah, I've been a victim of this or that or the other is a really tough step for these people to take. And so as you and as others in these people's lives, or even just individuals, let's just begin with the individuals themselves, as they're unpacking this situation they've been in and that they've been put through, this act of violence against them, what steps can they be taking to first find some of their own peace in this situation before, of course, without necessarily being pressured into saying that I've been a victim of this or I've been a victim of that act of sexual violence, which for some, A, is re-triggering them, and B, is putting them in a position where it sort of, unfortunately, is a taboo still to this day, and there's that element of embarrassment in some cases that also really plays a factor in people getting treatment that they need to deal with this trauma properly.
Sure. First and foremost is in taking the step and getting that bravery and confidence and taking a step is having the sense that you would or could be believed by somebody or anybody, and that you're not making it up or making a mountain out of a molehill, or jumping to a conclusion, but that and really talking to a therapist or even a crisis line, and there are many crisis lines dedicated to sexual abuse, whether child, adult, and that you will be believed, that it's not your fault, and that you will not be accused of making a false allegation. The statistics on false allegations are remarkably low, well under 10% of allegations that are made, and then keeping in mind that many legitimate allegations never come forward, so are probably even lower still. But part of this, right, yeah, is being believed, and that your story means something. It is, like you said, the lines are so blurred that what makes one person uncomfortable, or what may seem different, or that we've somehow, right, at different ages, stages, generations, may say, oh well, that's not the same. And just knowing now that a violation of a person's body, and their comfort and their safety, whether in workplace, school, team, wherever, is a serious infraction, and that we are dedicated as a community to making people feel safe. What that might look like is different for different people, but that when a person comes forward and says, look, I have been made to feel unsafe, or I have been violated in some way, that initially it's heard, respected, accepted, and investigated accordingly.
Yeah, and that's a big point in this, is no one has to come forward. There should be no pressure for someone to come forward and admit that publicly, whether it's to a small group of trusted people in their lives, or certainly to the general public in any way, shape, or form. People should be able to recover and to address the trauma that they've faced on their own terms. But when they do that, what should those that they're admitting this to, that they're confiding in for on this, or just venting to about their experiences, what should they be doing on the other side of that, as they're listening to that person tell their story? And in some cases, it is the story of the worst moments of their life, to make sure that you are a calming, listening presence and aren't adding to some of that pain or anguish that these people may be feeling.
Well, certainly, I think reinforcing the bravery and confidence that it took to share that information, that just the honor and compassion of being a person that any person would reveal something intimate and vulnerable to, and that right, that you're there for them, and I think in the spirit of safety is just asking the person what they need. You know, if they need an arm around them, if they need to be touched, or if they don't. You know, if it's good enough to be there, if they'd like to talk about it, or if they don't, let the person, you know, as the listening person, you know, ask questions before you proceed, you know, with anything. What would you like to hear from me? What can I tell you to let you know things will be okay? Is it okay if I sit closer to you or further away? I mean, and also modifying your own. If you're triggered too, you know, the person revealing to you may not know your history either. To say, you know, I need some time to process this myself, or this is bringing up some stuff for me that I need to check in with too, should also be okay. Certainly directing someone to a therapist professional crisis line, you know, suggesting if something does need to be investigated, or bring, like you said, not forcing it, but like, would you like to bring this to the attention of local law enforcement? Would you like to bring this to attention of, you know, a leader of a group or organization? What steps need to be taken? And just saying, I'm willing to walk those alongside with you as you're willing and ready. Like I said, certainly encouraging treatment for people who are struggling with symptoms, either physiological or emotional and behavioral. There are forms of treatment that are highly successful right now. EMDR is one that's gotten a lot of attention in treating trauma. It helps a person to separate their physiological and emotional reactions from their ability to be able to talk and process, which helps the therapeutic process and helps people sort of come to a new narrative about their own esteem, what happened to them, and how to move forward.
More information on resources for sexual abuse and assault. If you have been a victim and you do want to talk about that with someone, whether it be a professional, law enforcement, both, or just to speak about what you've gone through and have some crisis counseling available to you, Michigan.gov/voices4 is sexual assault and abuse resources, free and confidential, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also call them 855-864-2374, 855-864-2374, or the easiest way to remember it, 855-VOICES4. That's 24/7 free confidential sexual assault hotline provided by the state of Michigan. Joining us on the Megacast today is Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. And more information and ways to get in contact with them, Birminghammaple.com. Carrie, from a therapist's point of view, from a mental health professional's point of view, again, there's so much that can be gone through by people that have experienced sexual violence in some way or another. And that means that that would certainly, I would believe, that would mean that the treatment that they go through with a mental health professional can be varied and may be something that's slowly unpacked over time, so as to not re-trigger and re-traumatize that person and take them too much deeper into that situation they've been in. So from a mental health professional's point of view, where does that process usually go in terms of treatment? What does that look like, so that if someone is thinking about coming forward with a mental health professional, that they kind of have an idea of what they may be getting into?
Sure. Well, I think you bring up an interesting point. For some, when the awareness that perhaps there was something that happened in the past that crossed a line, or that there was an effect from something in the past to the present, sometimes there can be an eagerness to just share and overshare and get it all out. And then also that can in itself be traumatizing, in that a person can realize they've taken things sort of too far. And so a therapist, I think, in the beginning would just provide education and pace, and you know, allow a person to know, like, we will get to this, we will get through all of this, but we're going to sort of touch base as we're going, as to not go too far too fast, even with each other, in terms of, right, like, intimacy in that relationship, and really model healthy boundaries. You know, a therapist will ask permission or consent, may we talk about this further, or how are you doing as we're talking about this now? And like I said, so even if there is an eagerness, a trust, right, that the therapist is always motivated to make the environment safe to start and end each therapeutic session in a way that there is some closure, so that a person isn't perhaps left feeling sort of like raw and exposed as they're going out of their session into back into their real life. There are different forms of treatment. Like I said, there's group therapy that can be beneficial. EMDR is a treatment method. Another one's called trauma focused CBT, which is a method of sort of like creating sort of the mental things we've told ourselves as a result of an assault, and replacing those with more helpful messages to ourselves. So each treatment method is going to have a different beginning, middle, and end, and the therapists that are trained in those would be able to educate and offer explanation for why we're doing what at each step along the way.
And lastly, we live in a better informed world on these issues. These issues have come to light more and more in our society in recent years, and for good reason and for bad. It's horrible that we are hearing more and more of these stories, but it's good that we're hearing that this has been a problem in a number of different areas, and that those are starting in some ways and others to be addressed. So the big thing here is boundaries, especially in those more, for lack of better terms, minor incidences. Minor incidences in this regard are still major, and it ultimately comes down to boundaries. So if someone is, even if it's in a situation where they're just consoling someone in their life and they want to be mindful of those boundaries, not knowing their history, how should someone approach that softly and concerningly and with care?
Certainly, I could think knowing your own comfort level and being self-aware to say, hey, for example, I'm a really open person. I may overshare. I may, ask too many questions, and like, please, by all means, let me know your comfort level. If I've shared too much or if I've asked too many questions, let me know where your lines are, and sort of using that as a place to start having a conversation before any conversation. Like, what will we do if we're talking about something casually and then one of us is reminded of something that's happened in our life? How would I know that perhaps it's affecting you? And if a person knows, oh, well, my face turns very red, or I start to get a little jittery, it's having those conversations is a method of getting to know each other, is kind of a step towards intimacy before anything even more revealing comes out. Could be a very helpful tactic. It's often we just jump right into our lives and our conversations without thinking, do we know enough about each other to know what are our signs if we've crossed a line or boundary? Have you gotten too quiet? Have you gotten uncomfortable? Have you changed the subject? Kind of paying attention to those cues.
Carrie, appreciate you joining us to talk more about this issue, something that is very complicated, has a lot of layers to it, and it's been very helpful to unpack that in some ways and others and get more information, especially as we come to the end of April and recognize Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.